Hey folks, welcome to Beware the Wizard. This is my first video, and I wanted to share with you just a new kind of hobby I've gotten into. Aside from drawing maps and doing other sorts of tabletop RPG stuff, I got into scratch building. It's when you create terrain or, some sort of minis or models for tabletop RPGs using primarily trash and things like that. So this is one of the first things I built, and I'm really happy with the way this turned out. Very detailed, just using bits and pieces from whatever I could find, and I think it turned out really well. It had a cool effect, but I got thinking, this took a long time. Granted, it was my first time doing one, and I wasn't exactly sure what I was doing, but it did take a while. I thought, how can I streamline this, and what can I do to make something that's a lot faster and has the same effect? And then I thought, I have this term, I don't know if there's a name for it, but I call it a slappy. A slappy is when you do something usually artistic or creative and you're just like throwing it out there, like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, So oftentimes that's when you create a lot of cool things, when you have no pressure and you're just letting your creative freedom, go wild, and you're creating whatever you want. So I created this. Here, this tiny piece of terrain, and this took me about 2 hours, start to finish, maybe less, including drying time. And this is what I would consider a slappy. Now, is it as detailed as my first piece? No, of course not. Is it rough around the edges? Yeah, definitely. But it gets the point across, and I think it's great. You can fit your little minis in here if you wanted something, if you're playing Warhammer or something like that, or just a cool terrain piece for a Dungeons & Dragons scenario or campaign. So this is my Slappy, my scratch build Slappy. And now I'm going to show you how to make it. Thanks so much for watching.
All right, so we're starting out using some basic cardboard here. I don't have the actual foam board that I'd like to use from the dollar store, so we're using cardboard from a shoebox. First thing I do is draw out my shape here. This is just kind of a rough guess as to how big I want the actual terrain piece to be. And then we cut it out with some scissors. Now, the reason I'm doing this is kind of to restrict me to one size. I don't want to start going crazy and assembling things before I put it on a base, because then it might get a little too big and not be a quick project like I want. Here, when we glue these together, we're going to actually glue them so that the corrugation in the cardboard is going in opposite directions. In other words, it'll be perpendicular to itself. I'm also cutting this top piece a little smaller so that when it fits on top, we have a nice kind of chamfered or beveled edge. The next thing I do is think about some things that I might want to put on as the building blocks for my terrain. I found this lid. I believe it's for a chicken bouillon container, and I just kind of cut it in half. Again, not really measuring, not using any sort of exact cuts, because that is the essence of a slappy. You're just kind of slapping something together. And I figure if I glue this together here and glue it down to the base, I can get a nice kind of maybe a big gear look that's sticking out of the ground, or a big piece of mechanical equipment. As you can see, we've got this seam that runs down the middle, but we will fix that shortly. Enter the macaroni and cheese box. This is a nice lightweight cardboard to use, almost like a card stock, and I'm just cutting a small strip, and I'm going to pop that over top the seam there. Roughly measure just by holding my thumb in place and snipping. And then we're going to glue that on to cover that unsightly seam in the caps. I use an X-Acto knife just to cut off the edge here, so we get a nice clean line going down to the floor. Then I'm going to use some of these rhinestones. They kind of get everywhere, as you can see here. This is a tip I saw, I believe it was from Studson Studios on YouTube, to make a really cool kind of rivet look. So we're going to glue these on. These don't actually turn out being, put in the best place here, but it's okay, because later we actually end up covering most of them up with more of the terrain. Now that that's finished, I'm going to start another piece here, and this is an idea I had to create like a small window, maybe a piece of paneling with a mesh screen on it that the minis can peek out of. So I'm using 2 pieces of that macaroni and cheese box and popping out the center, so I have 2 roughly even frames for my window. We're going to use some mesh tape to create a metal kind of grating look. And, you know, this stuff can be tricky to try to find the end here. Still looking. Ah, there we go. So I'm going to cut a small piece of this and just kind of tape it across my frame. Use a little bit of hot glue, and we're going to glue these pieces together so that the edge of the mesh is neatly tucked inside, giving us somewhat of a clean look. Just going to trim off the edges here. Now I want to kind of lean this up against our equipment here, but I do need something here on the edge, on the other side, to hold up that frame. So we're experimenting with a couple different things, you know, bits and bobs. I think I end up settling on this piece of foam here. And I'm going to kind of cut out what will eventually look like a rough piece of concrete, maybe from a broken foundation or something like that. I'm just breaking it apart with my fingers to get a nice kind of rough, natural look. Sometimes when I'm working on a Slappy or something quick like this, I don't like to have too many materials around to give myself too many options. I find that by limiting myself, I can just use what's there, and that makes the process sometimes go a little smoother. There. After breaking this down to size, I think we've got a good fit. Then we're going to use a technique that I like to use with these small dowels to make what looks like rebar sticking out of the broken concrete. The trick to these is to cut a lot more than you need because probably 50 to 60% of them will go flying across the room and you will never find them again. After cutting them, I'm going to press them in where I want them and then hit them with a dab of hot glue to secure them in place. Then I'm going to use a small scrap that was left over from that mesh tape to wrap around the bottom here, just for a little extra character and detail. Great. Then we will glue all of this together. I would like to take this opportunity to ask you to please like and subscribe and help me grow this channel. I'd appreciate it. So I think that's a pretty good foundation for the base of the terrain piece. I do want to add something up top because I feel like I want more surface area for minis to stand on. So here I'm just kind of gluing on another piece of that shoebox to give me an elevated level. And we'll put a little ladder on there later to allow access. Now, this looks a little odd, not having any supports on it, so what I'm doing here is just gluing some little bits, little plastic pieces on to give the illusion that it's holding up this metal plate that's resting on top of the machinery. Let me make a small ladder, just again using those little dowels and some pieces of cardboard. Doesn't have to be pretty, I'm basically just securing it together there with the glue on the opposite side. This is I call it the crimperizer. I bought it at a secondhand store. It's great for crimping paper. And as you'll see, it gives a really cool corrugated metal effect with basically any piece of paper or cardboard you put in there. And I'm using this just to add a little variation to the floors in certain spots. Just going to add more of that, and now we're basically just popping in details. We attach the ladder, and now that the basic foundation is done, we can just go ahead and start adding all sorts of little bits. So I've got some tiny pieces of gears that were pulled out of an old printer. Here I'm gluing a tiny spring to the front. I save all of my little bits of foam to pack in. This is a paper straw, which gives a really cool kind of stacked pipe effect. And then here we use those little bits of foam and just pack it in anywhere that seems to have a a spot that may need a little more detail. There's another rhinestone for a rivet on the front. And I think the underside of this ladder would definitely be filled with kind of rubble and trash. So what I'm using is a dowel just to kind of stick some odds and ends inside there to make it look like it was built up over time. Now, I've seen this stuff called basing paste. I don't know exactly what it is. I saw it in a video and I tried to make my own using some white glue. I ripped up this sticky nug of, I believe that's reindeer moss. And what I'm attempting to do here is make a kind of gritty paste that I could spread on the ground layer here to blend those two pieces of cardboard together into more of a natural looking slope. This is some charcoal that I'm putting in there to add more grit. And as you can see, this is way too thick. I end up thinning this out with some acrylic paint. And the result turned out all right. I apply this very heavily all around the base of the piece. Again, just to add some kind of grungy texture and to blend those two pieces together. I also pack this in kind of underneath that frame, anywhere you think that dirt or grit would accumulate naturally. After hitting that with a quick blow dry, we are ready to begin painting. So I did run out of white primer. I used a paint and primer, kind of that brownish color. It did the trick. Again, just using what I had on hand. I then used some black house paint that I use for other art projects, and just real quick did a base coat over this entire thing. And as you can tell, I am clearly not aware of where the piece is on the camera because I tend to paint off camera more than I do on camera. You'll just have to bear with me there. After this black layer is done, we hit it with the blow dryer once again and quickly dry it. And then we're going to go in with that green without much of the grit in it, just kind of taking the paint. And we're going to paint some of the metal pieces. I think in this case I just did the corrugated metal and a couple other select pieces just to give some variation and color to the piece. As far as drying this with a hair dryer, I would not recommend it. You definitely get some streaky paint and some globbing that won't dry fully. But in the interest of time, we're making it work. Take some light gray here and hit the concrete and metal pieces. And then we go in with a little red. I'm going to mix a little gray with that just to keep it along the same color palette. Let me hit a couple select pieces with the red as well. Once again, we hit that with the blow dryer, and then we are going to begin a dark wash. This is really going to bring out the shadows in the piece. I made this dark wash with water, black acrylic paint, and dish soap. It's nicely thinned out so you can really slather it on here and let it kind of rest into the grooves, into the corners, the nooks and crannies, to give a nice shadow effect. Again, we hit that with the blow dryer. And now for the dry brushing, I take that lighter gray again, and I don't believe I show much of this because I'm not painting on camera at all. And there's some glamour shots, so that's the finished piece. I think it turned out really nice. Definitely dirty, definitely grungy, but very cool looking overall.
Thank you guys so much for watching my first video. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. I'd love to do more things like this in the future. If you have any tips for me, I'd love to hear them because this is definitely a learning process for me. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. Catch you next time.